Take two. Kyle here from All Media Reviews. Here to do the big year 2005. But before I do that, I do want to kind of go back and include some stuff that I didn't include on some of the other years that I'm finding, of course. So in the year 2000, one release I mentioned the Disassociatives in the 2004 video. Originally Daniel Johns and of Silverchair and Paul Mack formed a band called I Can't Believe It's Not Rock, and they put out a really cool EP on December 1st, 2000, which is before Diorama, but it's good. I've wanted to find a copy. I've never been able to find a copy for an affordable price. I've seen it online a couple times, but and in the year 2000 also, the Italian sort of, what do you call them? Post rock, shoegaze, dream pop rock, but also including sort of gothic metal band Clip 1918 put out their debut EP, Secession Makes Postmodern Music. There's some really cool stuff in here, although the singer's got a weird accent, but they even covered While My Guitar Gently Weeps, but they do some growls, but they are I don't know, really growls exactly, but it's very atmospheric. It's like Dredge, but kind of in that vein, or Clan Zoo in some ways, but doesn't use strings. But I'm going to talk about them. But then, okay, so that was in 2000. In 2002, I didn't include the second Apex Theory full length, which is the probably the weakest one. But I mean, their last two releases are the best thing they did. This came out topsy turvy on April 2nd, 2002, and it does include the song Shh Hope Diggy, which was on, I want to say, Brandon Burst as well. So they re-recorded some songs, um but yeah, Topsy Turvy came out. I should include that. I'm trying to include as much as possible. That I want to do cream of the crop, but then I'm missing this. I do this. I must do that. If I include this, I should include that. But so that was in 2002. Then in 2003, Clint 1918 released their debut album, Undress Memento, which includes like one or two of the songs off that demo. But Pale Song, Nave Watercolor, Stalingrad Theme, it has this like German element, even though they're from Italy, 1918, but very textured rock. I mean, again, similar to sort of atmospheric rock that you'd hear from like Dredge or Porcupine Tree, that kind of stuff. But Clip 1918's album Undress Memento came out on May 21st, 2003. And the other just glaring omission that I forgot to include, I definitely wish I had, but it was Archive's album Noise, which they had done a soundtrack the year before that. Of course, they did You All Look the Same to Me, and they'd actually put out two records in the 90s. I was wrong. I've never heard the second one. Londinium's the first one. It's like very, very trip hoppy. But Noise is really good. It's got a song called FU, and it's more song oriented, but it still has the trip hop, kind of electronic art rock kind of stuff. That it's a worthy sort of follow up for You All Look the Same to Me. And it kind of continued that kind of string that they've done ever since. Really, they put one record out that stands out after that, but I'd put Noise in my top, probably at least the top five Archive albums for sure. So all right, now on to modern progressive art rock year in 2005. A great year. One of my favorite years for music. Very deep year, very epic year. It's just filled with just excellent records. Anyway, so starting off, February 1st, 2005, sees Ben Sinister's Through the Broken City. They're not technically their debut album, but their first album with vocals. They had the Warp Pain from 2002, which was like a jazz fusion album. But Dan Moxon finds his voice. I love this record. It's got so many great like energy moments, playful moments. It's Jeff Buckley singing with Queen, or singing with the Mars Volta in kind of a Queen style at points in some ways. Songs like Truth or Truth, Tough Love, Hell or Shelter, the title track, Preach for the Stars. It has so many fun like keyboard parts. The guitar riffs sound kind of like at times Omar Rodriguez Lopez from the Mars Volta, but it's just the compositions really work. I've always loved this album, Through the Broken City from Ben Sinister. Came out on February 1st, 2005. So 3 days later, God is an Astronaut, post-rock band that features piano. Their album All Is Violent, All Is Bright came out. Not sure if this is the second or third record in their history, but I've always liked God is an Astronaut. Like, they're a post-rock band that distinguishes itself. They're not like Explosions in the Sky. They're not like Sigur Rós, not even like Godspeed. kind of a little more fine-tuned from a composition and atmosphere standpoint. But yeah, this is one of their best records. All is Violent, All is Bright. Came out on February 4th, 2005. So then 3 days later sees the debut, and I didn't talk about the EP a few years. They were a band that Fair to Midland. I know Daryl from Fair to Midland was, um, but Carnival's Themata. Yeah, it sounds quite like Tool, but it's just I like the vocals more than I like the vocals on Tool. Ian Kenny, there's a cool Tool influence rather. I mean, so is Fair to Midland of Apex Theory, kind of in that same kind of heavy, almost bordering on metal, like heavy art rock. Songs like Coat and Themata, the two tracks. This is their masterpiece for me. I'm getting oh, she's doing all this stuff, my wife, but songs also like Roquefort, Lifelike is very catchy and poppy at points. Scarabs that's crazy, and these are some odd time signatures. And Change Part One. This is to me up to this point Carnival's masterpiece. But yeah, this came out on February 7th, 2005. Great record. So moving on, February. This whole year is. I'll just say that this whole year is really big and deep. So and you had the debut album from Canadian psych pop rock band People for Audio, and This Will Be Our Homecoming on February 8th, the day after Themata. I don't have their debut album, a physical copy. I've heard it a few times. I like the one that followed it from 2007. I'll be showing 2007 also, but the New Ancients. But it's too bad they did tour a little bit with Ben Sinister. They played a few shows on. They showed them in that documentary of Bend in the Road that Ben Sinister toured in the late 2000s. But People for Audio were a great band, but totally obscure. And their debut album was no exception. But I like this one a little more, but it still goes on the list from a standpoint of band that even though they didn't get a lot of recognition, they were a great band for people that got into them. So People for Audio, and This Will Be Our Homecoming on February 8th, 2005. Moving on to the 14th of February, and you see Block Party, the debut album, after they put out a few EPs as well. And while they're not as overtly they're not as artsy as some of these bands, they have a math rock element. They influence some bands that were probably even more proggy, like Foals and Everything, especially. But their debut album, Silent Alarm, they're still to this day their most successful and they're most known for this record. Song like Helicopter and Banquet, especially, those were the two early singles. It's fun, it's post-punk, but it's energetic. You could say that some of the indie tronica shares a lot of qualities beyond even Apes and Androids with Block Party. So I mean, they probably influenced Late of the Pier to some degree. But anyway, Silent Alarm from Block Party, the debut album, came out on February 14th, 2005. So then the next week, on the 21st of February, to round out February, the band Doves put out their third record, and by most accounts, they're kind of their weakest. And I never bought it. I listened to it back when I was getting into Doves, and they're an important band, but this is probably their weakest album. Their album, Some Cities, which came out on the 21st of February, 2005. Anyway, so moving on to March, sees the first really big record of the year. You could say, well, Themata and Ben Sinister were pretty big at that point. But the Mars Volta's sophomore record, I can't remember if this was produced by Rick Rubin or not. I mean, the debut album was, but mixed by Rich Cotste. But no, it was actually Omar Rodriguez produced it. That's right. In that document they showed that. Shouldn't have remembered that. But the Francis the Mute. It's a tour de force. The climaxes are so big. It's kind of like Godspeed You Black Emperor, these post-rock climaxes. But Cassandra Gemini is it's a fantastic piece. Even though there's some psych noodling in the middle, but La Via Vasquez is Santana on steroids in some ways. And a track like The Widow, of course, was a single. I mean, I remember 2005 when this came out. It came out March 1st. It's like, are the hipsters going to actually listen to prog? Prog is finally there, besides, whatever you want to call prog. But, this is their masterpiece to me, even though it's not a perfect record. It's their peak, you could say, more so. And that other epic, Cygnus, Vignis, Cygnus, it's a trip. And Cedric Bixler Zavala sounds great. The trumpet, the Latin elements. I love this record. And it was, to me, their last great record. I mean, they put out a few other records I enjoy, but I'll be talking about, of course, throughout the rest of this history. But that was March 1st, 2005. So then the next week, another epic record, but not the band's peak necessarily. Caddisfly followed up. Did you know people can fly? Uh, yes. Anyway, this came out on March 8th, 2005, and it's not the first time they released an album in March in their career, Caddisfly. But this is Buy Our Intention, We'll Buy Your Unicorn. It's the From a production standpoint, it's a step up. There's a lot of songs on here that have these little parts, little piano parts, little kind of catchy parts, reggae parts, kind of very mystical, dreamy parts. The closing three tracks, Buy Our Intention, Will Buy You Unicorn, Set Sail the Prairie, and Horses Galloping on Sailboats, are the three albums they would release by title. It's kind of setting the stage for this sort of concept of the history of planet Earth and humans and planet Earth. This being Buy Our Intention, Will Buy You Unicorn, being sort of the beginning of time on Earth, or beginning of time on Earth, really. Set Sail the Prairie being the sort of present time, and Horses Galloping on Sailboats being the end of time. But there's just a lot of really fun moments, like on Crimson Solitude, Calm of Calamity. A lot of fun, kind of energetic choruses. There is some hardcore, post-hardcore screaming. There's little points. Sometimes Chris Ruff sounds younger, but yeah, I mean, it's a record that will grow on you. It is pretty epic, just like, for instance, it's like 70 minutes. It was kind of in vogue to release, these bands were releasing these 60 to 70-minute records, even more than that. But Buy Our Intention, Will Buy You Unicorn, great record, even though they would do even greater things. From Caddisfly, which was released on March 8th, 2005. So then a couple weeks later, fast forward a couple weeks later, and the Decemberists released, maybe up to that point, their proggiest full-length album, in Picaresque, which features Mariner's Revenge song, probably the biggest sort of go-to for the prog fans. It's like a sweet kind of, in some ways. It's got really cool dynamics, but it has like the fables, kind of folklore, folk tale kind of thing. Songs like The Infanta, The Sporting Life, Bagman's Gambit, Six Military Wives, The Engine Driver. There's a lot of charm to this record. It's not as overtly sort of stripped down folk as I find that Her Majesty and and Castaways and Cut Out, their previous records had been, but I grew to like it. Then I wasn't so keen on it. And then I got back a little bit more into it recently after hearing their newest record. But yeah, Picaresque, great record, coming out on March 22nd, 2005. So to round out March, another just excellent sort of favorite record of many fans, Porcupine Tree's Deadwing. Of course, this was a record that was written largely by, the premise was for a screenplay for a movie that was co-written by Stephen Wilson and Lasse Hawley, the artist who did a lot of the artwork for Porcupine Tree. It has my favorite, and a lot of people's favorite song, that the mini epic, Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, but including the Micro Ackerfeld guitar solo. That song flows so well. The dynamics work really great, and I don't know, the performance and the production on it is just pristine. Lazarus, of course, is a pop ballad. It sounds a little like Coldplay, but it gets me every time. It's happy and sad at the same time. Songs like Start of Something Beautiful, the climax on that track is great. Open Car, Mellotron Scratch, the title track, Shallow, Lazarus, Halo. I associate it with two songs, a Dredg song, which will come out later in the year, and also Napoleon Dynamite for some reason. But yeah, Deadwing. Early in the year, this was probably my number one record, although I hadn't heard a lot of these other records. But that came out on March 28th. So already in the first quarter, you had many good records. The Mars Volta, Porcupine Tree, Decemberist, Caddisfly, Carnival, and Ben Sister. So starting then in April, had a bunch of records that came out. Almost a month later, toward the end of April, I have a date for Italy's own sort of shoegazy, post-rock, at times gothic, almost doom metal band, Clip 1918. Maybe their cleanest, almost kind of heavy, punchy, energetic U2-esque album, Dopo Guerra, which, especially They Were Wed by the Sea, sounds super like U2. Definitely influenced by the sort of post-punk stuff like Joy Division and New Order, even like, your Interpols, and but Snow of '85 is very dreamy. Rachel, Night Driver, The title track, the last two, here's some double bass. It's post rock too. Even though the vocalist is kind of, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit, his accent, his English accent is kind of a little broken, but it doesn't really I don't get affected by it. This record I just got a ton of time for the year after seeing a friend of mine, Spectre 1982 from the Medium and Music blog, write about this, the late Spectre 1982, Shane. But Doppelgänger came out originally on April 25th, 2005. So the next day we had two more releases. Um, I got this right. I want to do this in the right order. Yes. One being another like epic debut album. Casey Crescenzo's kind of in effect his first sort of official full-length recording debut with the band The Receiving End of Sirens. Also co-led by Brendan Brown and Alex Bars among the rest of the other members. That this is a tour de force. They were a band for like over a year in the Boston area. They did some touring and stuff like that, and they finally released this. It's an epic masterpiece, even though there's some symbols that clip on it. I like the original artwork more. I've played this album a ton. It's super catchy, super energetic. This Armistice is like Queen on steroids in some ways. Um, the earworms just stay with you. It's like it's just a matter of time before they find out. Just a matter of planning a prison break, the rival cycle, the evidence, epilogue, Venona. It's just and it's a concept all about like some people breaking out of prison, but also maybe going through some kind of psychotherapy and like a sci-fi, like the Twilight Zone kind of thing. I do think of the movie Escape from Alcatraz when I hear it though. I wonder if it could sync up, but it's on par with any of the Deer Hunter albums for sure. Any of the best even though again the production and the mixing does bug me at points. It's just so damn good. The melodies, the vocal harmonies, the way they use vocal layers and the spacey guitar textures and the pianos, and it's just so sympathetic. So the same day on the 26th, so that came out, of course, Clip 1918 the day before, and then that same day also, Time of Orchids puts out their third album on the John Zorn album, Sarcast Wild. It's my favorite Time of Orchids record. I really like the run after it. Again, I mentioned in the previous videos, Time of Orchids kind of doing the avant-garde rock thing. Vocals are kind of like Mew. It's sort of schizophrenic, but it somehow works. Track like the tracks we ever wish. Just I get goosebumps every time I hear that, the way it ends, and it ends with whim. But yeah, it's epic. I mean, they're kind of, again, they're kind of quirky, they're experimental, but they're not too far off the deep end, I found, compared to some bands. So Time of Orchids, an undiscovered band in this style, somewhat. I mean, they're similar to Maud Llewellyn, though. Maud Llewellyn I consider prog metal of some kind, but they're not really metal enough. They're much just experimental rock. That album, Sarcast Wild, came out on the 26th of April. Then you had two more records that came out in April that I wasn't able to find dates for. Very good records. The debut album from Margot and the Nuclear So-and-So's from Indiana, and then eventually they resided in the Chicago. The early Margot, where they had the Fry brothers and some of the other members, and they were doing folky kind of haunting music. Some of it's singer-songwriter, but they used these cloudy synths, and they had horns and some strings, so they really were a chamber band, similar to like Anathello and Sufjan in a lot of ways. This album has like Skeleton Key, a sea chanty of sorts, Quiet as a Mouse, On a Freezing Chicago Street, Paper Kitten Nightmares, the concept about kittens, Dust of Retreat. I always think it's because they go meow. They have the little lyrics meow meow meow, and I got the kitty cat there. Yeah, Margot and the Nuclear So-and-So's, a little bit like Murder by Death. The early stuff I really loved, and I feel like we're part of this style. I know that Andy Fry was even a Marillion fan, but fortunately their whole career didn't end up. They're still a band actually, but Richard Edwards. They had a band previously called the Archer Avenue that Richard Edwards led, but anyway, Margot and the Nuclear So-and-So's, The Dust Retreat, released in April 2005. And along with that, the second of a collection of songs from Self, instead of the previous year they had released digitally Ornament and Crime. I think that was on like iTunes. But then on the Self website, he released Porno, Mint, and Grime, which I got this in 2017. I think I maybe had found a way to listen to it, downloaded it, but really didn't get into it until about 6 or 7 years ago. This has the song Summer Sound rather. Super Beach Boys and Jellyfish element on that. It's one of my favorite Self songs. I've been listening to that probably more than any Self song in the last couple of years. But Pretty One, if I knew what I know now, donating to science, This Is Love. It's like 18 tracks, so it's Ornament and Crime is not quite as long, but they're from the same kind of recording era. A lot of these songs, and they were mixed at the same time, so the two are pretty close. Not to say the same about the Fielder Band's released two albums this year within a year or two, but Ornament and Crime from Self came out originally in was for the fans, I believe, and for Matt Mahaffey in April of 2005. So moving on to May, only two albums in May came out that I have at this point. I'm aware of. One being System of a Down. Again, I don't want to miss this. Yeah, System of a Down on May 17th put out Mesmerize, my favorite System of a Down album, maybe their most polished from a sonic standpoint, and it has a lot of their kind of staples: BYOB, Radio Video, Violent Pornography, Question, Old School Hollywood, Lost in Hollywood. The Tony Danza cuts in line, Um, it's produced by Rick Rubin. They put out another record later, and you'll be talking about in a little bit. But this is my favorite record, beginning to end. I saw them in the tour with the Mars Volta. It's like they had Mars Volta put out France a few months before. They both had new records, and they did a tour together. They made me a fan, and I've still kind of, even though I love Toxicity, I lean toward this one as my favorite. Great record from System of a Down. Coming out on May 17th, 2005. Then the debut album and the only album they had for a long time. They had a band under a different name for a while. Screamo prog core band, Gospel. Their album The Moon is a Dead World came out on May 24th, 2005. May 24th? Yes. I mean, it has a lot of punk and scream, post-hardcore screaming in it, screamo, the difference between post-hardcore and screamo. But those psychedelic keyboard textures and like the math rock element, they're influenced by the Mars Volta, totally works on this. And I think it works just as well on the one that followed many years later, whenever it was 2022. So it was like 17 years later. But there's something that was really unique about them. You could put them on the same category with Propagandhi and with Circle Take Square to some degree, mathcore. But these guys had a psychedelic element that distinguished even themselves from those other bands. But yeah, I like this album a lot. I love even the singles they released later, and then the debut. I've always really liked this, and this is a loved album by the fan base. The Moon is a Dead World from Gospel, which came out originally on May 24th, 2005. So moving on to June, we go to the third week of June. The 21st of June saw an album that many people had heard. I think I got a promo before it even came out, but Dredge's Catch Without Arms, one of the catchiest albums of all time, filled with kind of very layered pop rock songs. Hungover Tuesday is my favorite track on here, but Bug Eyes should have been massive. It got a little bit of play. I bought the DVDs, these sampler DVDs from the Henry Fonda Theater that had the promo video for it at Best Buy. I picked them up. They were a penny a piece. Started giving them out to people. Ode to the Sun, Catch Without Arms, the title track. Lyrically, this is a great record. I think about it frequently. Tan Bark is Hot Lava, Sangreal, the piano part. That song by Halo by Porcupine Tree, and that I always think of together. It's a similar kind of rhythm to them. Matryoshka, it's almost a perfect record. I mean, it's Dredge, and they don't have that many records, but this was, it was their commercial sort of approach, trying to get it's the second record on a major label. They had done the Waterborne soundtrack a few years before, then they had a demo, Coquette demos, which had some songs that didn't make this, including, and one of the B-sides, of course, is not even on the vinyl either. Uplifting News. That in what's the other one? One that ended up on the live album. But they were sort of hitting all cylinders from a pop rock and catchy and melodic, and sort of catchy and melodic, the same thing. Memorability standpoint, I used to buy Granny Smith apples. I started the first year I was working at the company I've been working at for 20 years now, but I would buy Granny Smith apples at the store and bring them in and eat those while I was listening to this album. Stone by Stone's the song I was thinking about. They should re-release it with Stone by Stone and Catch Uplifting News. It'd be great. But so that was the 21st of June. The 27th of June sees I don't know if it was the debut album. Might have been the second. I think it was the debut album from Indie-tronica band from the UK called the Chaps album Ham. I lost the cover. I think it was like a slipcase. But Yeah, I mean, this wasn't this is my favorite, the Chap album, although they're a band that while I've always liked all their albums, I've only a couple songs I really love. One song called Proper Rock, but among the sort of indie-tronica, Late of the Pier, I was talking about earlier, well, not Block Party so much, but Late of the Pier, the bands that weren't quite at the level of Apes and Androids / Call Phones Powell, the Chap are right up there. Okay. The Chap's Ham is a record not to, I need to hear more, but it certainly belongs, and the whole Chap catalog belongs sort of within this catalog, this history. So that came out on June 27th, 2005. The Most Serene Republic, Canada's own, debut album is called Underwater Cinematographer, came out on June 28th, 2005. And while they would do better things, it was, it's chamber post rock, sort of in the vein of Do Make Say Think or Broken Social Scene to some degree. I think there's some connections with Broken Social Scene. Um, in fact, so yeah, I mean they have that similarity of the chamber stuff, but they would do better records. They only had a couple other records. They toured with Annuals once too, who we'll be hearing for in the next few videos. But yeah, it's got some weird titles. The protagonist suddenly realizes what he must do in the middle of downtown traffic. But some of them aren't so bad, like Proposition 61 and King of No One. You're a loose cannon, MacArthur, but you get the job done. Kind of definitely a sense of humor about them, but yeah, the Most Serene Republics, their album Underwater Cinematographer, came out on let's see here, June 28th. That I got one more record for June 2005, and you see the probably the last sort of bedroom style, more stripped down, loopy style record from Cloud Cult, and in some ways among the sort of hipsters locally here in Minnesota, especially. Advice from the Happy Hippopotamus. This is like one of their favorites, if not their favorite. I'll give him that the artwork is very cool. Like this is one of their most interesting artworks. Of course, they got their son Caden's picture on there and the symbol for him that this Cloud Cult would always do after this first record. It has the song Transistor Radio, which was sort of a radio hit, and I think of this album most for Happy Hippo, Car Crash, or some. I know this is the one they referenced going to Canada. I think because right around the time Bush got reelected, they were writing it and stuff like that. But the man jumped out of the window, but kind of the last of the Cloud Cult albums that were of this. I feel like the one starting with the record after this, they kind of found their sort of chamber rock, big sound. Um, but anyway, that came out on in June 2005. I don't have an exact release date. So another chamber artist in July that then came out with maybe their most well-known record, his most well-known. Come on, feel. Sufjan Stevens invites you to come on, feel the Illinois, or just Illinois as it's known. Of course, this has Chicago, which has been on several soundtracks, used in several TV shows. It's frequently used. It's a banger. I mean, I've heard it a lot, but I'm not sick of it, and I think it's well composed. It's got an earworm to it. But there's some progressive stuff on this. I want to say They Are Night Zombies is one of my favorite parts. I listened to this a couple years ago, revisited this. I hadn't listened to Sufjan in many years. And this isn't my favorite Sufjan Stevens albums, but it's close. But this came out on July 5th, 2005. In Michigan, I believe, came out like July 1st. So he tends to release albums in July, at least the States. This is the second and final, at this point, state album. And but it has the John Wayne Gacy Jr. sarcastic title on that one. Casimir Pulaski Day Decatur. I mean, it's the titles are convoluted, and it is not a short record. I don't know how long it is. I want to say it's close to an hour, maybe not quite that long, but maybe like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. It kind of ebbs and flows. I mean, it is the sort of chamber folk element, but I feel like the production and sort of some in the instrumentation was enhanced from Michigan and from Seven Swans. And I think I can't remember if this is the one that St. Vincent played on. I think she played on one of the records, and possibly Timbre, the harpist. But anyway, Illinois from Sufjan Stevens came out on July 5th, 2005. So, middle of the year, you already had many really great records, but then coming up a week later, yes, sees very obscure band out of somewhere in California, say Northern California. The Ebb and Flow or the Ebb and Flow. Their album, Time to Echolocate, their debut album. It's a male female like vocal dynamic. They sound like one of these sort of indie bands, a little bit like People for Audio in terms of the production values. I mean, I don't think it's bad, but they have these little parts, little string parts, little kind of like mellotron, little kind of psychedelic parts in almost every song. It's just when I want to think that they're just kind of average, they always surprise me. This album, the album after, I'll talk about in a couple of years. I think even more so, but um, Framer Framed and let's see, Firefly, the title track, Sonorous. That's the first track. Yeah, the Ebb and Flow are super obscure, but if people want to check out something like a buried treasure, like a buried like a diamond in the rough. The Ebb and Flow have always kind of surprised me how much I enjoyed them. And anyway, that album came out on the 12th of their debut album of July 2005. Unfortunately, they didn't last. They put out one more record, and that was it. I discovered them like a year after they broke up, unfortunately, through a podcast. So then on the 18th of July, just 6 days after the Ebb and Flow's Time to Echolocate, Imogen Heap comes back. I didn't talk about her debut album where she had Frou Frou. I didn't even talk about that because, I could have probably included Frou Frou. I suppose when I publish this candle, I'll include Frou Frou. But her basically masterwork, Speak for Yourself. It's just an electronic pop masterpiece record. Song like The Moment I Said It is like Kevin Moore of Dream Theater, the next generation in some ways. I love I always get goosebumps on that song. It's so emotional with the piano arrangement. Headlock, Good Night and Go. Of course, everyone knows Hide and Seek with the vocoder and all that stuff, but it's still a great song. Like Chicago from Sufjan, I've heard it a lot of times, but I'm not sick of it. The Walk. It doesn't have Jeff Beck, I believe, is playing a solo on one of these songs. I want to say I'm in Love with You, maybe Closing In. Daylight Robbery, that might be the one. Clear the Area. I mean, there's little story songs, a lot of, I know, relationships she had been in, just perceptions on life. She's classically trained. Great use of electronic textures and piano, and just great vocal performance from Imogen Heap. It was a breakthrough, in some ways. I like Frou Frou, but this is another level up. And I'd say at least one of her other records, she captured that same kind of, brilliance. But that came out on July 18th, 2005. So moving on, that's the end of July to August, all the way to August 23rd, in fact. We've got 4 releases. Let's see if I'm doing this alphabetically. One is a local Minnesota release from the sort of debut by name solo album. He had been in a few different bands, Us and Product, worked with John Wright from Later on Wright. But Greg Harris's sort of ethno-folk, progressive ethno-folk debut album, It Plays Me, which features songs like Stella, 13, the title track, what is it? Particles and Waves. Uses a lot of like Greek bouzouki. It's not his best record. The one that followed, I think, is even better. But it's got a lot of charm to it, and I mean, granted, again, it's ethnic music, it's folk music, it's very kind of, but it has like you definitely can tell that he's a fan of Robert Fripp and the Crimson stuff. Also a big Rush fan, Greg Harris. But It Plays Me, the debut album, came out on the 23rd of August 2005. So that's the first of 4. So then going back to Canada, the debut album from Daniel Victor's, brainchild, Never Ending White Lights, debut album, Act 1, Goodbye Friends of the Heavenly Bodies, came out on August 23rd, 2005. Many guest vocalists, of course. I'm not sure if Daniel even sings any lead on this. Of course, it has Jimmy Necco of Ours on the final track, Our Final Hymn, which is just melancholy and so dreamy and soothing. One of Jimmy's best vocal performances, but Daniel wrote it. It also features people like Judah Nagler, and Daniel does sing the From What I Once Was. Remember some of the other. I mean, that's the kind of premise of, it's a little bit like Arian, but more like atmospheric rock versus sort of big prog metal epics in a big fantasy tale. But it's I like this one. I like the next one almost equally. But the song that people if they've never heard Never Ending White Lights, they need to hear is the Dallas Green featured vocal, The Grace. That the guitar textures are super dreamy, and Dallas Green's voice is just, it shines so much on that track. So Act 1, Goodbye Friends of the Heavenly Bodies from Nevermind What Lights, also came out on August 23rd, 2005. So then also on August 23rd, 2005, We saw the second album from I think they're from Seattle, the Pacific Northwest owned minus the Bear, a band that I've sort of always had mixed taste with. Their best stuff I really like. Their second album, Minos El Oso. I didn't feature their highly refined pirates first album, although I believe I have it. I thought it was like an EP, but Michio's Death Drive is the biggest go to on here. You know, also the game needed me, El Torrente. Um, they were at math rock, really math rock, kind of more accessible math rock, but playful. But they had like their vocals always kind of was mid level to me. I feel like they went much further on the next record, but this is a decent record. I bought it on vinyl for a reason. So that also came out on August 23rd, 2005. And then to include that big day at least from a quantity standpoint, the third album from the new Pornographers supergroup out of Canada, Nico Case, Dan Behar, and AC Newman. Quinn Cinema came out on August 23rd, 2005. Power pop, indie darlings. The title track, Sing Me Spanish Techo's a banger. Bleeding Heart Show. Some of their best known songs were on this. I feel like when I got into them, this is the best album they had made beginning to end. I got into them in the mid like on 2007, but I don't know. It's splitting hairs. I think their records are pretty close, but if I'm push comes to shove, I go with Twin Cinema first. But that also came out on August 23rd, 2005. So let's see. Moving on to the big months of September. It starts off on the 13th of September with Sigur Ros's Talk, the follow-up from the Brackets record. And this is, to me, what their most accessible record. I don't have a physical copy. I liked it, but didn't love it. And I was around the time I got into Sigur Ros in 2005. But that's not much more I can say about it. It's just Sigur Ros going slightly popish. But it's still the vocal style and the textural, ethereal qualities. But that was on the 13th of September. The 19th of September, we saw two massive releases. And this is really the sort of, we're starting to find the peak of the year here, of a really big year. Muse and the Glass-Handed Kites, their second album on a major label. The first they worked with, I believe it's Rich Kotze on this one. The opening suite is like it's 7 tracks. Circuitry of the Wolf, China Bear Tree, Why Are You Looking Grave, Fox Cub, Apocalypso Special, and Zookeeper's Boy. It's a tour de force. It's absolutely perfect. It's like 30 minutes of just perfection, dynamics, dreaminess, fun, like energetic bass riffs, soaring vocals and vocal harmonies, some weird, like, dreamy textures. But then the rest of the record, which I didn't get into initially as much, I've grown to really love. Songs like Luis Luisa, which is super sad, White Lips Kiss, An Envy to the Open Fields, and Saviors of Jazz Ballet. This is a fantastic record. The artwork, cover art is questionable, but I mean, Mew just kind of, they went really big and it's super layered on this thing, and it worked. I mean, I love Frangers, but from an ambitious standpoint, this is maybe their peak. That came out on the 19th of September. So the same day, the second record, the follow-up to the Music for Nurses EP, and of course the debut of Floresta the previous 2 years, Oceansize from England, Muse from Denmark, of course. Everyone in position. I got into this album early in 2006, and it did win me over after a little bit of time, not very much. My favorite being the closing track, The Ornament, The Last Rung, sounds like a 70s prog classic. It builds, it's just so big, but the harmonies are great. It's very energetic. But the Charm Offensive, it's like this wall of sound opening track. Heaven Alive, I mean, this thing is a tour de force as well. I mean, to have both these records come out on the same day is just, it's almost coincidence. And then what's coming next, I'll tell you in a minute. But Music for a Nurse is a favorite of many bands, so calming track, but Heaven Alive, Homage to a Shame. There's very catchy moments. It's catchier than probably any other Oceansize record, actually, but there's still those experiments. New Pin, No Tomorrow. Gets kind of very dark and riffy. I love this Oceansize album, and that came out on the 9th of September as well. And the very next day, you get the third record from Coheed and Cambria's, their peak, sort of in terms of epicness, layers, concept in some ways, although they're basically a concept band. Every album's been a concept, almost every album. Good Apollo 1, Burning Star 4, Volume 1 for Fear Through the Eye of the Man. Of course, it's a mouthful. I've said it many times. This is, the Willing Well Suite is the greatest thing that they ever did. It probably always will be. Just the energy that Jesse, I just bang. The energy is just so flowing. It's like, no one can run faster than you can, That line just, I never get out of my head. Then you have songs like Welcome Home, 10 Speed of God's Blood and Burial, super catchy, super memorable. The Suffering was a hit. Mother May I. There's not a bad moment. The whole thing is so fluid, this record. I think all three of these records are basically fluid almost entirely, and it's just remarkable. They all came out within the 2 days in September, mid to September, the third week of September 2005. I would have been just pulling my hair out. I listened to the Coheed record a little bit after that. I had not heard Mew or Oceansize. And keep in mind, Oceansize and Mew came out in the UK. They came out in 2006 in America. But so to finish out the rest of this list, because that's sort of the peak of it. Yeah, it was the 27th, so it's just a few days. It was a week after Coheed. I'm doing this in the correct order, the chronological order. King's X's Ogre Tones, which came out. It was the 27th of September. It was a follow-up from Black Like Sunday, which was a bunch of old songs re-recorded, and I didn't include it because it's probably the weakest King's X album, but still not a bad record. This was a bit of a comeback, although I don't think this is nearly on the level of Manic Moonlight or even Bulbous, but it had songs like Freedom, which was a song that was on a B-side that was re-recorded. It was like a demo that was on. It was like I don't know, a demo or just a different version. It was on the a box single that I have on compact disc CD single. But it was a lot of people had never heard it. They finally got to hear Freedom. Fly, If, Stay. It has some good songs. I saw them play the whole thing. Goldilocks reprise I don't need. It's hit and miss, but I mean it's still notable in the sort of history. It was still King's X doing King's X, and Ogre Tones is a favorite of many. I'd still like to get the vinyl if it ever comes out. Probably will at some point. So then on the 4th of October, I was talking about Most Serene Republic and Broken Social Scene. Broken Social Scene's third album, the self-titled album, and to me the last really decent album they put out. The records they put out since haven't done as much for me. But it's a self-titled, and I think it kind of I talked about this in the CDs A to Z with the Bees. I need to listen to it more. It's not as good as You Fired It in People, but I think it's not that far behind. But the real hardcore fan base probably appreciates it more. Major Label Debut is one of the song titles. And they were again having members from other bands like Emily Haynes from Metric and Feist, of course, who had the solo career. So Broken Social Scene's self-titled album, the third Broken Social Scene album, came out on October 4th, 2005. So then on October 11th, the week after, they debut recording from one's own Kiss Kiss, the band from somewhere in upstate New York, led by Josh Banash. The debut EP, the self-titled EP, features songs like College Film Says My Doctor, Drifts and Pulls. I mean, I love this band, so I kind of have a bias, and I have a little bit of a relationship with them online, with Josh specifically, but they're two full-lengths they would follow this with. They'd go to greater heights, but for an EP, it's actually really charming. You could hear the seeds of what they would do just on their debut album, like a little over a year later. So Kiss Kiss's debut EP, self-titled, on the 11th of October, and I flipped this again. I screwed this up. The 10th of October, the day before. I'm on my calendar. I had this on the wrong dates. Pure Reason Revolution put out their debut EP. So it was basically two debut EPs came out the second week of October. They were the Sons of Sound before that I talked about a few months ago on the Pure Reason Revolution series, but the Cautionary Tales from the Brave, which was the precursor, it was released on Sony, I think. Yes, Sony BMG, to the Dark Third, which would come out the next spring in the UK. In summer 2006 here, but we'll be talking about 2006. But it has Bright and Bastards of Morning. I mean, most of the songs ended up on one version or another, but still, it's just worth noting. The Intention Craft in Aurelia was the one that was on their MySpace. That was the first one I heard. I did not hear this till December of 2005, though, so it's like a few months after it come out. But most people had. But the MySpace really got them exposure to a lot of people in the prog scene initially. That and the Porcupine Tree fan base. So to round out this big epic year, System of a Down puts out their second album, also produced by Rick Rubin. I mean, written and recorded especially in that same sessions for Mesmerize, Hypnotize, which is not an album that I've listened to all that much. I've never found to be. It does sound like B-sides from, that session, but it's got the title track, Stealing Society. I don't know. I mean, they played some of these songs live. But the thing that's interesting is considered right now the final System of a Down album. So you know it's notable for that sense. It came out on the 22nd of November. You know, the end of the year was kind of slow after being this massively busy year. The first of many years. Pretty much every year since has been close to this busy. Not necessarily as high quality in terms of depth, but in terms of numbers. So the final record I have is the another Leto and Wright album, which they tend to release albums toward the end of the year too. The Thrashing Machine and Other Storage was like their fourth album in like 5 years. You know, again, you could tell that they were just drawing on sort of very heartland history, folklore, folk history, folk tales, but more grounded in sort of real experiences and um, I don't know. It's like folk tales as opposed to sort of fantasy lyrics that prog always has, of course. But World Turned Upside Down, you know, they might have been influenced by 9/11. I don't know. The title track, East Virginia Blues, the other Earl of Otherware. They only have one really long, like, sweet song title, Bonaparte's Retreat, band slash Banbury Bill slash Sun Archrist slash The Juggler, which is 10 minutes and 45 seconds. It's sweet. So if they're doing anything overtly prog, it probably would be that. So that's it for 2005. Yeah, I mean 2005 as a summary was one of the best years for music for this style, for my taste, and really for the even include stuff that I didn't even include in here, like some of the prog metal stuff. You know, but yeah, we'll see what happens in 2006. I mean, you got stuff, Ben Sinister, Carnival, Porcupine Tree, The Receiving End of Sirens, Margot Nuclear So-and-So's, System of a Down, my favorite record from the Dredg, Imogen Heap's peak record, Never Ending White Light's debut, probably the best record from New Pornographers. And then you have that trilogy of records in September of Oceansize, Mew, and Coheed. I mean, it's almost unmatched. I don't know. I mean, I'll be going through some of these other years and see if I can find it. I think it's a greater year than 2003, even though 2003 was unbelievable. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.